So we are starting with the first of 10 oracles in this section, and this is the oracle about Babylon, which we read last week, I think, and I kind of said a couple of comments about it. But we're going to be looking at the first section this morning, which is verses 1 through 16, the judgment on Babylon, that and it's presented in a way that we're supposed to understand that the judgment on Babylon mirrors the judgment on the world. So this whole Babylonian section actually is going to start with this idea and end with this idea that the judgment on either Babylon or related to Babylon, depending on how you interpret the last section, um, mirrors the judgment on the world. So the rest of the sections in this larger outline against Babylon, which goes from 13:1 through 14:23, is after the judgment on Babylon mirroring the judgment of the world. Then we have more specifics about the desolation of Babylon, which will be brought about by the Medes, army from Media.
What?
And then after
I'm in
that,
Bible
there's a
study.
short section about the deliverance of God's
But sit there
people.
because I like looking at you.
And in after that, we have the taunt of the fallen and dead king of Babylon, which the people of Judah, having been delivered from Babylon, they'll rejoice in that, and then this is put on their lips. They're going to sing this or feel this way. And then finally, the last section would be a judgment on Assyria, which was going to happen closer in time, where God says, "This is my pattern of judgment for the whole world." So this section begins with a reference to judgment on the whole world being mirrored here, and ends with that. So that's one of the main themes. So let's read 13:1 through 17 um, right now. And the first section is 1 through 16, but I want to just sneak into the next section here. So 13:1 to 17, the oracle concerning Babylon, which Isaiah the son of Amoz saw. On a bare hill raise a signal, cry aloud to them, wave the hand for them to enter the gates of the nobles. I myself have commanded my consecrated ones, and have summoned my mighty men to execute my anger, my proudly exulting ones. The sound of a tumult is on the mountains, as of a great multitude, the sound of an uproar of kingdoms, of nations gathering together. The Lord of hosts is mustering a host for battle. They come from a distant land, from the end of the heavens, the Lord and the weapons of his indignation to destroy the whole land. Wail, for the day of the Lord is near. As destruction from the Almighty, it will come. Therefore all hands will be feeble, and every human heart will melt. They will be dismayed. Pangs and agony will seize them. They will be in anguish like a woman in labor. They will look aghast at one another, and their faces will be aflame. Behold, the day of the Lord comes, cruel with wrath and fierce anger, to make the land a desolation, and to destroy the sinners from it. For the stars of the heavens and their constellations will not give their light. The sun will be dark at its rising, and the moon will not shed its light. I will punish the world for its evil, and the wicked for their iniquity. I will put an end to the pomp of the arrogant, and lay low the pompous pride of the ruthless. I will make people more rare than fine gold, and mankind than the gold of Ophir. Therefore I will make the heavens tremble, and the earth will be shaken out of its place, at the wrath of the Lord of hosts, in the day of his fierce anger. And like a hunted gazelle, or like sheep, with none to gather them, each will turn to his own people, and each will flee to his own land. Whoever is found will be thrust through, and whoever is caught will fall by the sword. Their infants will be dashed in pieces before their eyes. Their houses will be plundered, and their wives ravished. And then the first line in the next section, behold, I am stirring up the Medes against them, who have no regard for silver and do not delight in gold. So what I've read is obviously not the whole oracle against Babylon. That goes on for another chapter. It ends in chapter 14, verse 23. But this section that I've read begins with the announcement that this is against Babylon. That's in verse 1. And then there's a short introduction that goes probably around verse 6 or 7 to the entire prophecy. And then after that, it starts talking about universal language type of judgment. And so I want to highlight that first. That's a big picture event. So I'm not following the outline exactly. I'm going to skip ahead to number 5 on the outline under the first section, and then we'll back up. So what I want to show here are some of the clues that makes us understand that this is judgment. The judgment that God is going to bring with the Medes against Babylon is a picture of judgment of the whole world. Of course, it's hard to avoid, the conclusion once you see the language. So in verse 5, we see that at the end of verse 5, it says that the Lord and the weapons of his indignation are coming to destroy the whole land. And some translations have whole earth there. And in fact, the ESV that I'm using has a footnote for whole earth. And then in verses 9 and 13, well, actually 6 and 9, this is called the day of the Lord. Wail, for the day of the Lord is near. That's verse 6. And verse 9, behold, the day of the Lord comes, cruel and with fierce anger. So we have this judgment on Babylon called the day of the Lord, which we all associate naturally with the final day of judgment on the whole world. So there's what the Lord is doing here by linking these two ideas, the judgment on Babylon with the day of the Lord, is indicating that what he's doing here, delivering his people from an oppressor and completely destroying the oppressor, is a picture of the final day of judgment. So he has that. And then he goes on and says, it's the day of his first fierce anger in verse 13. It's also we're kind of skipping around in verse 7 and 8. It says, this affects all people, and every heart will melt, and every person will be dismayed. And also verse 8 says those things. Of course, verse 10 talks about the sun, moon, and stars will stop giving their light. This sounds like a cosmic judgment. Verse 11 says, it is the world that the Lord will punish all of the wicked in the world.
What's she doing?
And verse 13 says that the heaven and earth will tremble when the Lord judges the wicked. So it implies not just a local judgment, but the universal judgment. And finally, in verses 14 and 15, it teaches that on that day of judgment, men will abandon their ideas of finding any security in other people, and they'll flee from the wrath of God, but they will not escape. So these pictures, this language about universal judgment, day of the Lord, the whole world, judging all the sinners, the sun and moon and stars not giving their light, this is, implies a universal judgment, but then it's linked in verse at the beginning of the chapter, and also in verse 17 again, to the local judgment on Babylon. So wanted to kind of get, this is kind of the forest view. We're looking at the whole thing to see what's going on. And then I wanted to talk about some of the trees, go back through the passage and talk about some of the trees here. So we'll return again to the to the idea of Babylon as a picture for the world, and especially in judgment. We'll return to that in a few minutes, Lord willing. But now I want to go back up to to the top of the chapter. I guess before I do that, though, let me ask if anybody has any questions about anything at all right now. And if it's not on my outline, I'll stick it in somewhere. Does anybody have any questions? Okay.
No.
All right. So chapter 13, verse 2, on a bare hill, raise a signal, cry aloud to them, wave the hand for them to enter the gates of the nobles. This is the Lord telling his people to set up a signal and wave the hand. And so he's saying, participate in this. But the interesting thing here is the gate of the nobles. This probably is a play on the name Babylon. Babylon means gate of the gods. And the noble ones and gods are equated a lot in the mythology of the ancient Near East there. And so he's kind of doing a play on the name, let them enter the gates of the nobles, let them enter the gate of the gods, Babylon. So that's an interesting one. Verse 3, I myself have commanded my consecrated ones, and have summoned my mighty men to execute my anger. This is the Medes. We read verse 17. It's the Medes, and they're going to be described a little bit later after verse 17 as ruthless and without pity, and people who cannot be bribed, and who are just coming to conquer Babylon. And so the Lord is summoning them. And in other passages, we also learned that it's not just the Medes, but there's a coalition of armies coming against Babylon. And in fact, historically, Babylon falls to a combined army of Medio and Persia. So, but in charge of that army was the king of Persia. So it's the Persian Empire, and the other armies assembled underneath them end up attacking Babylon. In the last part of verse 3, there's a translation. I don't think there's an issue, but I think there's certainly a difference in the way the emphasis is placed here, and the way the last line is translated. So that last line is in the ESV, my proudly exulting ones. So after it says, I have summoned my mighty men to execute my anger, comma, my proudly exulting ones. So the ESV says, and that's what I just read. So the ESV and the ESV translation, the emphasis there seems to be on the warriors themselves are proud. And so they're proud and they're haughty. And it's interesting because the Lord is judging. That's the thing that he's judging Babylon for. They're arrogant. They're full of pride. They're pompous. He's judging them, and he's bringing pompous, arrogant army to judge them, which is what Habakkuk complains about. But in verse, same verse, verse 3 in the NIV, it doesn't say my proudly exulting ones. It says those who rejoice in my triumph. So we have a completely different characterization. And depending on your translation, you might have one that is basically saying, like the NIV, these people are basically my servants who know me, and they're rejoicing over me. They're coming to do my will willingly, and they want me to get the credit, that type of thing. That's what the NIV kind of sounds like. And the other option is represented by the ESV, which is followed. There's a lot of translations that line up on either side. But the ESV would be, these guys are also proud. So telling you something about the warriors and their self-sufficiency in the ESV, and the NIV is the warriors are glorying and doing God's work for God's glory. So I think I don't know who's got anything close to the NIV, like the people are rejoicing in God's victory. Anybody? I think the New American Standard has something like that, right? Catherine, what
The
does
New
yours
American
have?
Standard, yes, it says, my proudly exalting ones to execute my anger.
Right. Okay. My proudly exulting ones to execute my anger.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So that sounds more like it sounds like an ESV type thing, even though it doesn't say they're knowingly executing this anger. An older New American Standard says, my warriors who boast in my eminence.
Oh,
So that would,
I'll just start from the beginning in verse 3. I have commanded my concentrated ones. I have even called my mighty warriors, my proudly exalting ones, to execute my anger. That's the
yeah.
whole thing.
Yeah. So
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. So it doesn't imply that they're exulting in the Lord. That's
No.
as the NIV seems to. Um, yeah, the NIV basically says those who rejoice in my triumph. So it's definitely saying that. Yeah, Mom.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any reason that this could not be also interpreted as a heavenly host,
Um,
a heavenly army?
yeah, I think that's I don't know, excluded. I don't know if it's excluded completely, but the identification of the Medes as the army in verse 17 is, I know it's a long way away from verse 3, but there's that's the army he's talking about is the Medes there.
Okay.
Yeah. And it lines up with actually a lot of prophecies about that Babylon will be judged by the Medes. You have them named specifically, the Medes and Persians. You have them named specifically in other parts of Isaiah, in Jeremiah, and in Daniel. So you have this lots of emphasis on it. So I want to
Well,
look. Yeah, go ahead, Shirley.
I could read you too what the Amplified says. I've got the Bible out. It's got the four different. It's got King James, NIV, New American Standard, and Amplified. And the Amplified says, verse 3, I, the Lord, have commanded my consecrated ones. I have even called my great warriors, my proud, exulting ones, which are the Medes and the Persians who triumph for my honor to execute my anger.
Yeah, yeah. So that sums it up real good, I think. Thanks for sharing that, Shirley.
Sure.
So I wanted to look real briefly at one of the passages that talks about the coalition of, well, actually talks about Cyrus the Persian, who is going to be the king who is over the army of the Medes. So Isaiah 45, 1 through 6. Isaiah 45, 1 through 6 says, Thus says the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have grasped, says to subdue nations before him and to loose the belts of kings, to open doors before him, the gates may not be closed. I will go before you and level the exalted ones. I will break in pieces the doors of bronze and cut through the bars of iron. I will give you the treasures of darkness and the hoards in secret places, that you may know that it is I, the Lord, the God of Israel, who called you by your name. For the sake of my servant Jacob and Israel, my chosen, I call you by your name. I name you, though you do not know me. I am the Lord. There is no other besides me. There is no God. I equip you, though you do not know me, that my people may know from the rising of the sun and from the west, there is none besides me. I am the Lord, and there is no other. The passage is going to go on and talk about he's going to conquer Babylon, free the Jews, and rebuild the city and the temple. And the part I wanted to note here was that in verse 4, it says he does not know the Lord. Does not know the Lord. And it's, historically, obviously that's true. Cyrus is the king of Persia. He does not know the Lord. Josephus tells a story similar to the story in Esther, right, where King Ahasuerus was having a restless sleep, and so he called for the annals to be brought so he could, listen to the really boring history of all the exploits of the empire. Ahasuerus was the king. He was the king. He was the husband of Esther. He was the king of Persia, just like Cyrus here. And he brings the annals so he can hear them, so he can fall asleep. And it turns out to be the turning point in the story, because he hears how Mordecai saved his life and was never rewarded. So anyway, you know the story, or you should know the story. Cyrus, Josephus tells us, had a similar experience. This would have been a couple of hundred years before Ahasuerus. So Cyrus also had a restless sleep, and he called for somebody to read to him the annals of the kingdom. And as Oh no, actually, it wasn't the annals. He called for them to go into the royal library and find some obscure text that from a conquered people. And so a guy comes back with a scroll of Isaiah and just randomly opens it up, apparently to chapter 45, and he reads it out loud to Cyrus, who immediately becomes awake to hear his own name in the, in the in the scripture.
Mhm.
And then it goes on and says, you're going to conquer Babylon. Um, so so there could be a little bit of, I know that I was called to do this, but I don't really believe in this God. I think so I don't know which way you want to take, we're still talking about chapter 13, verse 3 at the end there and how you want to understand it. But that's kind of the background that's going on here. And the story is really interesting, and we'll have occasion to revisit the Cyrus stories when we get to chapter 45. So I'm sure you'll all remember every week. Oh yeah, we're almost there. Um,
We're hanging in, that's for sure.
hanging in, yeah, hanging in. The exciting conclusion will come one day.
I'll be
Um,
90 by
Yeah,
then.
indeed it will.
Yeah. All right. So moving to verse
I do have a
4.
question.
Yeah, go ahead. Sure, Shirley.
On the verse we just did, on though thou hast not known me. It
Yeah.
seems like I heard someone say before that what that means, that tells us that he was not a Hebrew. Is that true?
Yeah, he's not a Hebrew. The verse, yeah, but he also doesn't know the Lord. There were some non-Hebrews that knew the Lord, but not Cyrus.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So he's a Persian. He's a Gentile. It's one of the really ironic things that God uses Gentiles to help his people throughout the Old
Right.
Testament.
It's very strange. Yeah, it's very strange.
So verse 4 of chapter 13. So we're back in chapter 13 now. Talks about at the end of that verse, the Lord of hosts is mustering a host for battle. There's a really insightful footnote, I think, or not footnote, cross-reference that the ESV has that links this passage with the Joshua 5, where the commander of the armies of the Lord uh, is there, and Joshua meets him. And the implication of the link there is that the Lord of hosts who's mustering this host for battle is the commander of the armies of the Lord, which would be the pre-incarnate Son. So the second person of the Trinity here is probably being called, the Lord of hosts here refers probably to the second person of the Trinity. I guess I'll say it like that. And this brings up a couple of other passages which are interesting to consider when you think about the Son and his relationship to judgment and leading armies and things like that. So if we look at Matthew 22, there's a parable there that I think I want to read. Yeah, we'll read 22, 1 through 14. It's going to be in verse 7, which is the point I want to get to. Again, Jesus spoke to them in parables, saying, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who gave a wedding feast for his son, and sent his servants to call those who were invited to the wedding feast, but they would not come. Again, he sent other servants, saying, tell those who are invited, see, I have prepared my dinner, my oxen and my fat calves have been slaughtered, and everything is ready. Come to the wedding feast. But they paid no attention and went off, one to his farm, another to his business, while the rest seized his servants, treated them shamefully, and killed them. The king was angry, and he sent his troops to destroy those murderers and burned their city. Then he said to his servants, the wedding feast is ready, but those invited were not worthy. Go therefore to the main roads and invite to the wedding feast as many as you find. And those servants went out into the roads and gathered all whom they found, both bad and good. So the wedding hall was filled with guests. But when the king came in to look at the guests, he saw there a man who had no wedding garment, and he said to him, "Friend, how did you get in here without a wedding garment?" And he was speechless. Then the king said to the attendants, "Bind him hand and foot and cast him into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth, for many are called, but few are chosen." So, so verse 7, I said, was the verse I wanted to consider. Verse 7, following the, the characters in the parable, this is the king. So this would be, the king is having a wedding for his son. We would think that the son there is Christ, and that the king is the father. And the father, in that understanding, verse 7, the king was angry and he sent his troops to destroy those murderers and burn their city. And it may be that that's what's being communicated there. It doesn't specifically say that the son is Christ. You don't know which is Christ. You just know that by rejecting God's offer, you will come under his judgment. The interesting thing is that it's the sending of an army to destroy their city. And so this is seen by lots of people as a prediction of the fall of Jerusalem. It's pointing to the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD, which is talked about a lot of times in the New Testament as the vindication of Jesus. He makes the prophecy in Matthew 24 that it comes to pass in the fall of the city, and it's irrefutable proof that he is Messiah. But verse 7 is one of those kings sending an army to destroy judgment type passages. There's another one which also has to do with the fall of Jerusalem in Daniel 9. Daniel 9, verse 26. And that one is. So we'll just pick up in the middle because I know you all are familiar with the Daniel 77's prophecy. So we'll pick up in verse 26. And after the 62 weeks, an anointed one shall be cut off and shall have nothing. And the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Its end shall come with a flood, and to the end there shall be war. Desolations are decreed. I'll read the next verse too, I guess. And he shall make a strong covenant with many for 1 week, and for half of the week he shall put an end to sacrifice and offering. And on the wing of abomination shall come one who makes desolate until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator. So the brief outline of Daniel 9:24 through 27, which is the 70 weeks prophecy, is that Daniel is in exile. He's asking, he sees at the beginning of the chapter, he notices, he's reading in Jeremiah and probably Leviticus, and he sees that the 70-year prophecy, and he thinks the exile is going to be 70 years, a complete period of time. We've been here for 67 or 68 years. We're still not the people that look like, we haven't returned to the Lord. There's no reason why he would deliver us. And so Daniel prays, and he prays a prayer of repentance on behalf of his people. And he basically says, we're not the people that you should deliver. How long is our exile going to go? I'm going to continue. And God says he's basically not going to deliver him for another 70 times 7 years. That years is an interpretive choice. It's really times. It doesn't say years, just times, but 70 times 7 times. And when that deliverance comes, it will be accomplished by, I guess maybe I should read verse 24 and 25, right? It's got the good stuff in it. 70 weeks, and my ESV has a footnote saying that's not really weeks, it's just times. It's heptas, 77s, are decreed about your people and your holy city to finish the transgression, to put an end to sin, to atone for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal both vision and prophet, to anoint a most holy place. Okay, so verse 24 has 6 things in it. They're all positive, which are, finishing transgression could be positive or negative. They've filled up the transgression to the full. They finished their transgression, or there's no more transgression. God has dealt with it. I think it probably means both of those. Put an end to sin, to atone for iniquity, bring in everlasting righteousness, seal, vision, and prophet, anoint the most holy place. These are things accomplished by Jesus in the first century. This is the end of the 70 weeks, right there. He says this is what's going to happen in this time. This is the main thing, main focus of prophecy. And then he gives the time when it's going to be. Know therefore and understand that from the going out of the word to restore and build Jerusalem to the coming of an anointed one. That's the phrase you want. Anointed one, a prince. There shall be. I don't like the way the ESV does this. They put a period where there shouldn't be one. Coming of an anointed one, a prince. There shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks, right? Then for 62 weeks it shall be built again with squares and moat, but in a troubled time. What? The city will be rebuilt. And after 62 weeks, an anointed one shall be cut off and shall have nothing. And the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. So you have anointed one and prince mentioned in earlier in verse 25 and then again in 26. The interpretive question is, are we talking about the same anointed one who is the prince, or are we talking about different people? So there are two divergent of interpretations. I go along with those interpreters who think that the anointed one in both passages is the Messiah. He's going to be cut off in verse 25, but he's also verse 26, he's going to be cut off and have nothing. And he is also the prince who was mentioned in verse 25 and 26. He's the prince. And so the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city. Who are those people? If Jesus is the prince, who are the people? Well, they're the armies of Rome. He is the commander of the armies. The armies of Rome destroy the city and the sanctuary. Mom.
I have a question that's a little bit off topic, but it has to do with the work Jesus did. So in verse 24, where it says to seal both vision and prophet, does that mean that visions and prophecies will be fulfilled and there will be no more?
That's one of the 4 major interpretations there. Yeah, okay. So there's one which is that one that it just basically means fulfilled, right? And then brings to the end, fulfilled. So at the end of these 70 weeks, or the one who is going to come will fulfill all of the prophecies. It could be that. Another interpretation by a minority group of commentators is that of the 6 things that are mentioned in verse 24, there are 5 positive things and 1 negative thing. This is the negative thing. And it is to blind the eyes of the Jewish people so that they don't see the prophecies being fulfilled, right? Yes and no, could be. There is New Testament language that sounds like that could be applied to this. There's the cessation of verbal revelation. By that, what I mean is that second idea that you mentioned, which was there's no more prophecy, the sealing up, the completion of prophecy. So not really emphasizing the idea of fulfillment, although that's true, but thinking of the idea of prophecy ceasing, because the one who was prophesied has come, so there's no more need to prophesy. And and so I tend to lean toward that. I think that makes the most sense. The fourth one was similar to fulfill. I don't remember the exact particulars of that, but so it was blind the eyes, seal up their eyes so they can't see it, fulfill all the prophecies, bring an end to verbal prophecy. So those are the 3 main, 3 of the 4 ideas. The fourth one again is similar to the fulfillment. So
I have a question, please.
Yeah, sure, Catherine.
It's in Isaiah, Daniel, of course, in verse 25.
Yeah.
I don't know what your opinion of this is with me, but I'm just very focused on details. So in verse 25, it clearly identifies the Messiah with a capital M and the Prince with a capital P, which in my translation identifies Christ, the anointed one. Now, in verse 26, it again capitalizes Messiah with a capital M, but then, and the people of the prince, a small p. What am I supposed to do with that? Because right away, it cuts off the identity, to me, of the Messiah, where they
Well,
capitalized prince.
Yeah.
What do I think of that?
Well, you have two options. So you of course know that there are no capital, either all the letters are capital in the text originally, or none of the letters are capital. They don't use capitalization the way we use it. So we have, depending on what time period the text comes from, the manuscript, I mean, that they're basing their
Mhm.
interpretation on, it could be all capitals or no capitals. So the capitalizing of Messiah and Prince in any instance are it's a translation choice. It's the editor who's doing that. And so the
Mhm.
editor or the translation committee, I would guess, is opting for the prince being Titus, the general commander of the Roman armies, the second prince there being Titus, who was the commander of the Roman armies that destroyed Jerusalem. And so you have two options. You can write Titus in the margin, or you can cross out the small p and put a big one there. So those are your interpretive options there.
Oh, I prefer a capital P because it was just used, and that's what maybe I overthink. I don't know. I want to be absolutely certain of my understanding. So I appreciate your answer very much. Thank you.
Sure.
Can I read what the Amplified says on that?
Of course.
It says, then after 62 weeks of years, the anointed one, capital of course, will be cut off and denied his messianic kingdom and have nothing and no one to defend him, capital H, and the people of the other prince, low p, who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. Its end will come with a flood, even to the end there will be war. Desolations are determined.
Yeah, thank you. So that
Mm.
sounds very similar to the way Catherine's
Mhm.
translation is approaching the text. And that is a standard. I mean, I don't know what the percentages are, but I think probably actually, I probably do have a feel for that. I think probably the most interpretations are going to lean towards Titus being the second
I'm going to
prince.
do that. I'm going to
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Uh,
Thank you both.
Yeah. So I think, and I think that perhaps the reason that Titus this is leaned toward, one of the factors in that is that um, he's well, he is a prince. He's not the king or emperor.
Mhm.
And also, it doesn't make Jesus responsible for destroying Jerusalem, right? I mean, not
Right.
directly responsible.
Uh-huh.
Um, but
There you go.
but in either case, the parable that we read makes the the king, who is either God the Father or the Triune God,
Mhm.
responsible. So right. So anyway, it's interesting. It's a passage worth thinking through, and
Yeah.
we have to have a place in our theology for God bringing judgment, sending armies, because he's doing it in Isaiah, and he does
Mhm.
it in Matthew 22, and I think he's probably also doing it right here, but in
Mhm.
the Daniel passage. So yeah, the other major interpretive, or a couple of, Daniel 9 is a hotbed for controversy. Lots of people wrote lots of things about it, but the beginning date, the decree, the word to restore and build Jerusalem, right? Verse 25. When was that? uh, I think it's the one that was issued the very next year. you know, that's the one Daniel would have been aware of. Not the one that came 60 years later. Anyway, there's so it would have been that would have been the decree of Cyrus. Cyrus decrees the very next year, he decrees that the Jews, after he conquers Babylon, he decrees that the Jews go home and that they rebuild the city and the temple. So that's 539. And then people get all troubled because if you add 490 years to 539, then you still don't get to the AD era. You're still in the BC era. And I think that's the problem with that, is that they're being overly literal. I mean, they're being literal when they don't even have to. They don't have to be. The reason they don't have to be is because nowhere in the text does it say it's going to be 490 years. The word year never appears. The word week never appears. You have 70 heptas, and hepta means an undefined period of time, of undefined duration.
Mm.
And so
Mhm.
70 of those just means it's the perfect time. It's a long time. It's a long time from you, Daniel, but it's the perfect time. And since the entire chronology of the passage, you know, and some people, they go, oh, it comes down to the exact day of, you know, the triumphal entry. It's like, well, no, it doesn't. How could it do that? How could it possibly do that? Anyway, the prophecy is vague in the sense that it isn't given so you can plot it on a calendar. And then
Mhm.
the other argument is, oh, well, it's got to be 70 times 7 years because it's specific and it'll be specifically fulfilled, just like the 70 years of Jeremiah was specifically fulfilled. You all familiar with Jeremiah's prophecy that there were two, Jeremiah 25, Jeremiah 29, that the captivity would last 70 years, or that the time of Babylon's dominance would last 70 years. Those are the two perspectives on the 70-year prophecy. If you look at when they were released from Babylon and how long they'd been there, so they went into Babylon in 605, 596, and 586. So finally, the final destruction in exile starts in 586. They're released in 538 or 539. That's not 70 years. There's no way to get 70 years out of it. And so the dispensationalists basically go, it has to be literal, just like the 70 years is literal. You go, can't you even do basic math? It's not literal. So anyway, it's the same with many prophecies. The 70 is a number that means period of time that is the perfect, the right, the appropriate period of time. And so 70 times 7 is happening in the Daniel prophecy. Anyway, I talked a lot about that. Didn't mean to talk so much. But it's okay. If anybody has another question, we'll stay here for as long as we need to. Anybody have any other comment or question? Okay. One day we might go through Daniel. Okay. So those were the kind of the small issues. This what I mean small is the kind of the trees instead of the forest view. Babylon, Gate of the Gods. My consecrated ones are the Medes. The translation issue in the emphasis in verse 3 about, you know, proudly exulting ones, or those that rejoice in my holiness or my highness. And then the Lord of hosts probably is correctly identified with the commander of the armies of the Lord. And so those were the kind of the smaller issues. The bigger issue there is that this is a judgment being announced against Babylon. The Lord's going to bring an army against them made up of the Medes and other confederate nations. And as we see in Isaiah 45, the army led by or under the command of Cyrus the Persian And then that this judgment on Babylon is going to be a picture or somehow related to similar things are going to be true about the judgment of the world at the end of history. Now, I would say that the things that are going to be true don't include military, the armies, things like that. I think what we're talking about here is the deliverance of God's people, final vindication of God's name, his glorification in bringing about what he has said he would do, and the complete defeat and utter desolation of the enemy of Christ and his people. I think all of those things are true of the final judgment and of any judgment in history where God is vindicated by delivering his people and putting the enemy down. So I said Babylon was a symbol for the world and its sinful rebellion. Let's go to Revelation 17. So look at that. It's a Bible study where we get Revelation and Daniel in the same study. Pretty amazing. Revelation 17, let's see. Verse 1, then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and said to me, come, I will show you the judgment of the great prostitute who is seated on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality, and with the wine of whose sexual immorality the dwellers on earth have become drunk. And he carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was full of blasphemous names, and it had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and jewels and pearls, holding in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and impurities of her sexual immorality. And on her forehead was written a name of mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of prostitutes and of earth's abominations. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints, the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. So the passage goes on for the next couple of chapters talking about Babylon the Great and the judgment on Babylon the Great. Babylon's going to fall, and it's all, a lot of the language used in the judgment on Babylon in these passages is going to come out of Isaiah. It's also going to come out of Jeremiah and several other places in the Old Testament. But Babylon the Great here is being portrayed as the fountainhead of all the abominations on earth. And so the name, right, that's the mother of prostitutes and of the earth's abominations, verse 5. So the source, the symbol, Babylon is the symbol now of all rebellion against God. It's not a rebuilt Babylon at the end of history. It's nothing like that. It's basically the world's spirit, the spirit of rebellion against God and all the people who live by that spirit. So then Babylon becomes, by the end of the Bible, is very clearly a symbol. It's being used symbolically as the enemies of God's people. It's specifically mentioned there, Babylon's the one that killed all the prophets, right? Which is quite interesting considering that Jesus says that it was Jerusalem, that killed all the prophets. So Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and of the earth's abominations, and I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. So world spirit there. Yeah. See the same thing in 1 Peter 5:13. Peter writes in 1 Peter 5:13, she who is at Babylon, who is likewise chosen, sends you greetings, and so does Mark, my son. It's almost universally thought that Peter was in Rome when he wrote this, not Babylon. In fact, Babylon didn't exist in the 1st century. There was a little outpost town called Babylon, but it wasn't even on the same location as ancient Babylon. It's just a town that happened to have the same name. It's like a fishing village. Peter wasn't there. He was actually probably in Rome. It's like 95% of the commentators say that. And so he's using Babylon as a kind of a name for Rome here. And Rome was known as, the cesspool of the whole world. It was a place where there was full of sin. So it's got the anti-Christian, anti-God connotation. Babylon has that. and we know where that comes from, right? That's coming from the Tower of Babel. And we'll look at that in a few minutes. So let me just move on to Isaiah 13, 19 to 20. We're going to skip over 18 just to make this point here. So there are some people, dispensationalists in particular, think that Babylon will be rebuilt in the last days, and that everything I'd said in the last 5 minutes is nonsense, that Babylon is not a symbol, that Babylon is going to be rebuilt, and that Peter was in Babylon, he was in that little town, and things like that. And they insist that we interpret the Bible literally. And I'm wondering what they do with this, verse 19 and 20. In Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the splendor. Now, this is talking about the historical Babylon, right? Isaiah 13 is talking about the historical Babylon. In Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the splendor and pomp of the Chaldeans will be like Sodom and Gomorrah when God overthrew them. It will never be inhabited or lived in for all generations. No Arab will pitch his tent there. No shepherds will make their flocks lie down there. And then again in Jeremiah 50, verse 39, Jeremiah 50, 39. Therefore, this is about Babylon. Therefore, wild beasts shall dwell with hyenas in Babylon, and ostriches shall dwell in her. She shall never again have people, nor be inhabited for all generations. These are the people who insist that Babylon will be rebuilt and re-inhabited. These people are literalists. They say, well, the book of Revelation talks about Babylon, the last end times enemy, so it must be rebuilt. Like, what do you want to take literal? The book of Revelation, which is a highly symbolic book, or Jeremiah and Isaiah, which is a prophecy of the fall of Babylon, which says that it'll never be inhabited. Now, I don't think we have to take either one of them literal, but they're the literalists, right? They're the ones who want to take things literal. You can't have it both ways, right? If you're a literalist, you can't say it's going to be uninhabited forever and it will be rebuilt. You can't do that. So I just wanted to point that out in case, you come across the Babylon's going to be rebuilt and re-inhabited and it's the end times enemy. Part of that's true. Babylon is the end times enemy, but it doesn't have to be rebuilt because there's always people who hate God. It's always been true. So let's look real quick at Genesis. We'll do the Tower of Babel, and that'll bring us to the end of the section on this section here. So in Genesis 1:22, and also in 28, and also in 9:1, the Lord gives a command. I'll just read 1:22. We'll take that as summarizing the command. God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply and fill the waters and the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth. Sorry, I'm going to go to the next one, verse 28. And God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and multiply. So he's speaking to the man and woman. Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. The command here is the part I want to look at or think about is they're being told to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Fill the earth and subdue it. Fill the earth. That's repeated in 9:1 after the flood. So it wasn't rescinded because of the flood. Noah is being presented as the second Adam, a new world, new command. And God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. So that's chapter 9. Chapter 10 is a genealogy telling us how we get to Noah. And then chapter 11. So chapter 9, fill the earth, right? Which means they have to spread out. That's what that means. To fill the earth, you have to spread out, right? So Tower of Babel, now the whole earth, chapter 11. Now the whole earth had one language and the same words. And as people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. And they said to one another, come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. Then they said, come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top to the heavens, and let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth. Oops. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of man had built. And the Lord said, Behold, they are one people, and they all have one language. And this is only the beginning of what they will do, and nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. Come, let's go down and there confuse their language, so that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord dispersed them from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. Therefore its name was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth. And from there the Lord dispersed them over the face of all the earth. The issue is not that they built a city and they wanted to be like God. Okay, that is an issue. That's a bad thing. But the real issue is, as you can see by what's emphasized in the story, is they were sought to directly contradict God's word to them to disperse over the earth. And so God accomplishes that by confusing their language and stopping their building, and then they're dispersed over the whole earth. That's the point, right? But it's Babel, and it's on the scene in the land of Shinar, where Babylon rises later and takes the name Babylon, which is obviously related to the name Babel. And so all of the biblical later imagery and usage of Babylon as a symbol for the rebellion against God actually starts way back in Genesis 11 and gets built on by the ruthlessness and the pride and arrogance of Babylon, the nation. And it just becomes typical of what rebellion people are: self-sufficient, proud, arrogant, pompous, rebellion in what God says do this, and they go, we're not going to do that. We're going to do the opposite. So Babylon is, back to chapter 13. We don't need to look at it, but in chapter 13 of Isaiah, Babylon is being used in two ways. Being talked about as the kingdom that will exist as a powerhouse in that nation, in that part of the world, in just 100 years or so from Isaiah's time, talking about that and God's judgment on that nation. And it's saying, this is the way I judge all rebellious sinners. This is the end of all rebellious sinners. And this is also the end for all my faithful people. I will deliver you from such oppression. Right. So that's what's happening in the very first part of Isaiah 13 there. Anybody have any thoughts, comments? I realize you guys who don't have the outline, I might have gone a little fast, and I hope I didn't lose you. I'll try to be slower.
No, I kept up. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Catherine.
That's me.
That's you. Okay. All right. All right. I'm going to stop the recording.